Welcome to the, second installment of the DSend Podcast. I'm going to keep workshopping that name. Let me know if you guys have any ideas, but it's been about 2 weeks since I made my last entry. And again, just kind of going with the idea of action absorbs anxiety. And so there's still a lot of things going on in the world. Just figured I would honestly express some things. This is some of my action to try to get rid of some of the anxiety of what's going on right now. Um, so I realized after the first episode I had not given any sort of introduction as to who I am or my background or whatever. So really briefly, I grew up in northwest suburbs of Chicago. My father was an ER physician for most of my life. He retired somewhat recently. My mother's formal training was actually in nursing, and then she mostly became a stay-at-home mom as we got a little bit older. And we lived a fairly comfortable middle-class life. I'm the third of four children to my parents. I have an older brother, a younger brother, and my sister is the oldest of the four of us. Again, growing up in the Chicago suburbs, just kind of did normal things there and ended up getting into gymnastics fairly young and then started competing when I was, I think, about probably about 8 years old and competed all the way through and beyond college. Went to Stanford University for undergraduate school, competed there as a D1 NCAA athlete. Um, but before that, I had already made it onto the national team for USA Gymnastics and had competed internationally a few times before even college, and then competed through college again, both for Stanford as well as for the US national team. I was on the World Championship team, won several international competitions. I was at Olympic trials in 2008. Actually 2004 first, 2008, and 2012. Didn't make the Olympic team at any point. There's a little bit more of a story behind that at the 2008 Olympic trials. And then competed another year afterwards. Ended up going to veterinary school at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. Became a veterinarian after that. Took a year off in there to actually go back to training, and then went back to vet school and graduated and was a veterinarian for a little while. Did some internship training at CSU in Fort Collins, and then went on to teach veterinary stuff. Emergency medicine is what I was teaching at Midwestern University out in Phoenix area. Did that for a few years, and then actually went back for specialty training. Got my specialty training in emergency and critical care at Auburn University. And then now I've just been practicing veterinary medicine in a specialty sense in the emergency and critical care department at a private practice. Currently, we are living just a little bit outside of Denver area, and that's where I'm recording this podcast. Is just a little bit outside of Denver. Um, so that was kind of my story, and that's kind of how I got to some degree to where I am. Obviously, meeting several people and getting a pretty awesome experience along the way with all the traveling and international stuff that I got to do. Experiencing college as a D1 athlete is also a very unique experience, I think, and kind of, is a testament to grit and resilience and all those things, as well as time management and things like that. So take all those things honestly with me everywhere I go, and that's kind of a lot of who I am. Today, I think, is one of the things, at least on my mind. I'm sure some people watching the news are aware of it. It's a little bit late to talk about this because this news already came out about a week and a half-ish or so ago. But wanted to chat a little bit about um, the government taking a 10% stock in Intel. And so this is kind of a unique and weird situation to me, I think. It's just kind of a relatively lay but intelligent person that's kind of watching the news and watching this administration disrupt pretty much every institution in America and abroad. Um, so this is, I believe that at least the second time in this current administration that they're the government, are taking a share in a private stock. So the first time was also fairly recently that U.S. Steel, in selling to Japan, to Nippon Steel, the U.S. Government, this administration wanted and uh, determined and enforced that they must get a golden share. So they're supposed to be able to have some sort of say in terms of how that company is going to be regulated and managed and all that kind of stuff. So right now the U.S. has a golden share in U.S. Steel that's now going to be part of Nippon Steel. I think really this is, in terms of the government sort of taking a stake in a private company. One, obviously on the surface you have to look at that and say that's a it's a pretty communistic way of going about things. I will go ahead and say it that Trump is the most communistic but also ridiculous president that we have ever had, in terms of taking stock in private companies. He seems to be behaving that the government is just his own personal business to run, and the government is not a business. It is there for the people. It is there to provide services. It is not a business to be managed that way or profitable in that sense. It should be profitable in other ways, but it's not there to be a business, hiring and firing however you see fit and doing things like that, because again, it is there for the people to provide services and stability, and it's there to think decades ahead of what's going on right now. That is the government's job, is to be worried about things that the average person doesn't have to be worried about on a day-to-day basis, so that they can not be worried about those things on a day-to-day basis. So this kind of, I guess, government involvement in private affairs, at least when it comes to economic things, as far as I can tell, has happened about 3 times or so, it seems, in recent history. So World War One, it happened when the railroad system was nationalized, along with the telegraph and phone systems that were developing then as well. Again, that was during World War One, so a little bit of extenuating circumstances there. Second time in recent history was Truman in the 1950s, when the steel mill was temporarily seized to avoid a big strike. And again, obviously steel was needed at the time for a lot of the industrial revolution that was happening then. Not that that was the industrial revolution, but still, we were quite reliant on production, much more than we are nowadays. So that was to avoid a catastrophic strike with the steel mills. And then it happened again after the 2008 crisis, when Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were bailed out by the US government. And I think, taking those as examples for, maybe what this one is, I think we kind of have to look at it as these were all in responses to pretty extenuating circumstances, or true, national crises and emergencies. I mean, World War One, we don't have to explain that. 1950s, there were several things going on then, and again, super reliant on production at that point, so can't really live without the steel mill industry. 2008 was the national crisis again at that point, and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, it was elected to kind of bail those out. And I think, aside from the fact that those were all based on emergency and truly crises kind of situations, I think the other part to note is that they were all temporary. This was not the government taking a permanent stake in this. The railroads came back. The steel mills went back to private things. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Eventually, the government kind of slowly sold their shares in those companies, so that they are no longer primary stakeholders in that. And now the US government and this administration has bought 10% stake in Intel. And I think, just kind of thinking of the economics in this, and I am not an economist, but this is just, again, me kind of coming at it with reasonably logical look of what are the economics of this. And I think, in a very maybe oversimplified sense, I mean, this is basically, the government took Intel stock certificates and they moved it from a safe that was somewhere else. I don't know if it was in, stock portfolios or other things or whatever, where people could invest in it or whatever, just in the markets. But they take it from one place, from one safe. Now these stock certificates are just sitting in a government safe. So what was the point of that? And I think I'll get into that in a little bit. And it's not like, the government in doing this has, changed the CEO of Intel or changed their production ways or even their management style or anything like that. Really, nothing has changed in this situation aside from the location of these stock certificates now are resting in the government safe. And if anything, in terms of more economic stuff on this, the stock options and the investment opportunities are now decreased for Intel because that 10% share, stake, whatever, could have been owned by several people, several private investors, innovators that may have had some input on how things could be done or run or whatever. But now it's just one entity, the federal government, owning 10% of this stock. So if anything, it's done the opposite of diversifying Intel and has now limited the number of other investors and options that they have. And so it's not like, Intel was struggling or that they needed these stocks or these shares to be bought. They were doing fine. They are on the production side of all these chips that we're making for all this AI stuff going on. And the AI market has been booming and is really driving. They are the only reason that the US government is, or the US stock market is not in a recession right now, is that we have these basically 7 big companies that are all heavily investing in AI. And Intel is not struggling, was not struggling, did not need a bailout from the central, from the government, from this administration. And so, then I think we have to kind of ask what was the point of this? And I think if you believe what the government is saying, Scott Bessent has said that this is not to rescue Intel. This is not a bailout. They've also said that they are going to be private investors in the Intel company as a whole, and therefore, this isn't that kind of reason. This isn't a rescue or bailout or whatever for Intel. This is the government purposely taking a 10% stake in that company as passive investors, or so they say. I guess the other question is Intel from this? Did they benefit because they're now going to get preferential treatment from the government? Is the government now going to say that all of the government needs to use Intel chips, or are they going to call up Microsoft and Apple and say you have to use Intel chips now in your computers? Personally, I think that's obviously a huge overreach for the federal government to do. Personally, I think individuals and individual companies should be able to decide what chips they want to use and what seems best for them, and that's how capitalism works. It's socialism is the way for government to say you have to use these things. They take their champions and then force that on the rest of the government or rest of the company, and that's why they tend not to do very well. So is Intel going to get some preferential treatment from this? In which case, again, that's not really a situation that I want our country getting in on. I don't think, even though I talked last time, it's quite easy, honestly, to appease Trump and stroking 3 different things. You can either stroke his ego, his pocket, or less PC other thing. So is this Intel trying to stroke government or stroke Trump's pocket? Did something happen in this meeting, which I think we also have to point out is government or Trump said initially, I think he was tweeting this or posting on whatever Truth Social junk that he uses, was saying that the CEO of Intel should resign, that he is incompetent and cannot run this company. Then he, the CEO of Intel, is invited to the White House, has a meeting with Trump, and now the government is buying or getting a 10% share, 10% stake in that company. So to me, that screams, some sort of insider whatever or preferential anything that again is not something that the government should be getting involved in, and shouldn't be, that's not a government that I trust or anybody's going to want to deal with. If they're just working out shady deals with private investors, I think that's pretty awful. And so other ideas for why they got the stake in Intel is, are they going to use this stake for something else? Are they going to use Intel chips throughout the government? Um, and if it's not any of those things, which they haven't explained, then I think we're kind of left to conclude that the government is lying. And so are they going to bully others into using Intel? Like I was saying, are they going to contact Microsoft and Apple or whatever and say you have to use these in your computers? Which, again, I'm not going to make any sort of conspiracy theories on that, but that makes me a little uncomfortable if the government would just say you need to use these chips in your computers that we all have. That's pretty easy step from there to get into a lot of spying throughout the entire country. Um, and I think, again, people and private companies should be able to decide what they're going to be using for the things that they want to do. It makes me rather uncomfortable that this administration is trying to pick stocks that we all now are invested in, because this is a nationally owned company now. So we, America, are invested in this company. Personally, I'm not really comfortable with that idea that we all have to be invested in this. Um, and I don't think that they should be choosing the things that go into our computers or how those things are produced. So, I don't really know what the point of this is, and I think that's kind of another issue on its own. The only other thing to mention, I guess, is Trump keeps saying that he wants to build this sovereign wealth fund, um, which, if that's really the case, then, sovereign wealth funds are used to manage surpluses. They're there for times of need when we have, a whole bunch of feasts, basically. We use them in times of famine. That's what a sovereign wealth fund is. And if we're looking right now, the, the US government is not in a feast kind of mode. We owe the rest of the world trillions of dollars. I don't remember if it's like 5 or 6% of our GDP or whatever, but it's record amounts of our GDP that is currently our debt. And our debt to GDP ratio is just getting worse and worse. And with the passage of this bill that Congress did recently and the way that Trump seems to want to run the government, those deficits are only going to get exponentially worse. And so it's not that, they just have this pile of money sitting around that they can buy stocks to build this sovereign wealth fund. And so that means we are borrowing more money in order to buy stock in an American company, which seems a little bit like trying to go into debt so that you can gamble, which, again, I cannot see the logic behind that. And if that's not the case, if we didn't buy this stock and something shadier happened when Trump had this meeting with Intel CEO, then did the government get this for free, for some sort of discount, whatever? Um, and again, I'm not super comfortable with those kind of shady deals. And Trump keeps saying he wants to build this sovereign wealth fund to, quote, promote fiscal sustainability, lessen the burden of taxes on American families and small businesses, and establish economic security for future generations. And so, again, if that's the case, then what are we doing with all of this deficit? And that seems to be ballooning. That's not something that's definitely not fiscal sustainability. And at least as of right now, with all these tariffs and whatnot going on, it is not going to burden, nor is it lessening the burden of taxes on American families and small businesses. In fact, they are the ones that are paying most of this, at least, well, we're going to. Um, and again, if it's economic security, then I'm not really into the government kind of telling me what companies are the most secure ones. I think I can do that from my own, and make that decision. I don't need the government kind of doing that for me. So I think this whole situation with buying the stock, either if we believe them on the face of things, it makes no sense at all. And if we have to make some assumptions that they're lying, then pretty much any situation where they're making something up is shady at best. Um, and so I think it just kind of speaks to a bigger thing that, the government answers to the people. And right now, this administration is basically saying, we don't give a crap what the people say. we're going to do whatever we want to because we have an egomaniac who's a narcissistic, uh, honestly terrible person and convicted felon. And anybody can say I have Trump derangement syndrome or whatever if they want, but those are the facts. He has all of those things, and that's not somebody who should be running our country right now. The country or the government should be afraid of the people, and they should answer to the people. The people should know if the government is getting into bed with a particular company, we should know why. And doing shady deals where the U.S. Where the U.S. person, where a U.S. citizen does not have any sort of say in that, and doesn't get to have a choice or decide for themselves, that is a scary situation to me, and I'm uncomfortable with that in our government right now. So um, I guess that's kind of where I'm going to leave things for today. I'm trying to make these installments a little bit shorter because the first one went a lot longer than I was expecting. But that's where I'm going to leave things today. Is I don't think the government should be meddling in private companies, short of emergency situations. I'm happy to hear some comments. Feel free to leave any questions, comments, whatever. And I guess stay tuned until next time, and everybody take care.